These are the stories we share around the dinner table, tell in front of the campfire, and listen to on our porch. This is a place where tales are told and stories are heard. Grab your tea, your cocoa, your wild turkey whiskey, your wine. Welcome to Season 2 of the Storytellers Porch, where we will be hearing tales of the farm with your host and storyteller, Jill Davis.
Welcome to the Storytellers Porch. I'm Jill Davis, and I'm so glad you joined us back for more of our farm episodes. Today, I have I can't even say how excited I am for the guests that we have today. I have Deb Nyenhuis here today. Deb, welcome to the porch.
Hey, Jill. I'm so excited to talk to you about growing up on a farm.
It's going to be so much fun. One of the things I love about the Storytellers Porch is how it connects people from different parts of the world, different parts of the country, and different parts of, well, honestly, my life. And so, Deb, can you just take a second and tell our listeners how you know me?
We met, if I recall correctly, back in Oklahoma. We were both Air Force families, and we met through homeschool groups and at church and several other venues, but primarily through homeschooling. You were a mentor to me.
That's so funny because I think of you as the ultimate homeschool mom. And one of my favorite memories of our worlds crossing over, and I don't know why this is one of my favorite memories, but we both had towhead blonde little children.
Yeah.
Who are the same age. I think, is Rachel a little older?
I think so. She's 26. She'll be 27.
And he will be 26. So
Okay.
just a little bit different. But my favorite, and I have a picture, and if I can find this picture, I will put it on the website for our listeners to see. It's a picture of your daughter and my son at maybe 3 or 4. They had to be 4, playing soccer in Oklahoma. And these 2 little white, tufted haired little kids. And I just remember that so sweet. And I remember Rachel so sweet. And so when I started thinking about the farm, of course I kept thinking of you because I knew you grew up on a farm. Back in the day, I didn't connect what it meant to grow up on a farm. But having spent the last year, not even on a farm, let's be super clear here. I am not a farmer. I own the land. He owns the crops. I don't do anything other than say, oh, thank you for putting seeds in my land and growing crops because I don't do that. Just the basic maintenance of the farmhouse and the outbuildings is extreme. And I know that for as long as I have the farm, every summer I will be repairing one building or another. And that does not include feeding children, taking care of a family, running a farm, worrying about if it's going to rain or not. I have never paid such close attention to the weather report. The crops need water.
I'm hooked on the weather. In fact, my husband bought me a weather station. Growing up on the farm, that's what you did every day. Is it going to rain, not rain, hail, not hail, snow or freeze? Because all of those things impact the crops.
One of the things that the gentleman who farms my land told me, he said it's impossible, even though you have this very high technology weather equipment, you do not know if it's going to hail, which quarter section it's going to hail on. It could hail on one quarter section and one quarter section over nothing.
Yep.
Yeah. And you can lose half your crops or lose none of them. So his farmland is all scattered throughout the county for that reason. And I think that's a fascinating thing. So we already got going, and I haven't even asked you, what drink did you bring to the porch today, Deb?
I brought a Diet Coke. I have been a Diet Coke addict for years, so that's what I have today.
I love that. And I remember being a Diet Coke addict with you. I somewhere along the line gave it up, but I do have my coffee today. I definitely do need the caffeine, and it's a great way to start on the porch. And I always think back to my days of a different lifestyle than we really experience much anymore. I can remember dropping by your house with the kids to have a cup of coffee and just sit and chat. And that's what the porch is about, is really that sharing of ideas and the things that we used to do and get to do and experience in a different lifetime. And I know they're out there doing it, but it seems less and less common. It was such a different lifetime ago. However, I find, and I guess this is part of I hate to say the aging process, but I don't know what else to call it. But the older I get, I guess life process. We'll go with that. I like life process better. But the older I get, the more I reflect on my parents' lifetime and my lifetime and what I'm giving to my children and my grandchildren and my great-grandchildren who I may never meet. And it's important to me. And I know, Deb, when we just chatted talking about you doing this, it took you back a little bit. So I want to hear about your farm story. I just want you to start telling me a little bit about, I may interrupt you with questions because I want to tell you a little secret that you may not know since you grew up on a farm. You ready for it?
Okay, I'm ready.
Most of the world doesn't know what it's like to grow up on a farm. And they think that they do know because they read Little House on the Prairie, right?
Right.
But that's not what it's like at all. And my dear friend Emily, who is on several of our episodes this season, is my one who keeps me on track. And I know part of your story is about the finances of the farm. And she said, well, how can somebody have a mortgage on a farm? Like she didn't understand that you mortgage a house and you also mortgage a farm if you buy it. Because the only story she's heard, my farm story, about homesteading. And your story is very different. So Deb, will you just get us started and tell us a little bit about your upbringing and about your dad's role in the farm that your mom has?
Okay, I actually did some ancestral and research history going way back many years ago. There was the centennial or bicentennial, and we had a book written called The Touch of Tripp. I grew up on a farm 5 miles north of Tripp in South Dakota, and my dad had done the research. And so how I ended up on the farm where I grew up goes back to 1879 when my great-great-grandparents came over from Russia. They immigrated. They were Germans, but they immigrated from Russia and homesteaded a farm 4 miles north of Tripp. Then my great-grandfather, he got a farm also 4 miles north of Tripp, just across the road. Then my grandfather was born and he bought a farm about a half mile away or a mile away. I'm not sure of the actual distance there, 4 miles north of Tripp. And then my dad rented land and then eventually bought the farm on that same square section.
You have farming in your DNA.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
It's so funny because I gallantly just throw around the idea that my great-grandfather homesteaded in 1888. You just trumped me. 1879. You've been around in the farm family longer than we have.
And what's so funny, within 2 miles of where he set up in 1879. I don't think that farm's around anymore, but anyway, it goes back that far.
Important to point out here too, is that in farm country, now I don't know about South Dakota, but I know in Kansas, 2 miles is a really long ways. Yes. 4 miles is even farther. And when you put that into perspective of 1879 or even 1919, there were not cars. It was all horses and wagons and walking.
Yep.
So those 4 miles really make a difference.
Yes. And you had mentioned in your podcast about country school. My dad went to a country school. My mom actually grew up in a sod house on the prairie of South Dakota, much like Laura Ingalls Wilder.
Let's make this really clear because I think sometimes, like when you say sod house on the prairie of South Dakota, we really do all go back like, oh, that must be like, she must be 120 years old, right?
Yes, she was born in 1943. They lived in the sod house until 1955. So it wasn't that long ago that she was started.
Crazy.
Yeah, I know.
Okay, you caught me off guard on that one. I'm always learning new things. Do you or does she have any pictures of the sod house?
I think Mom does have a picture. I'm honestly not sure. I'd have to ask her.
If she would happen to have one, we would love to share it with our listeners.
Okay.
I keep interrupting you. I'm going to sit back on the porch, drink my coffee, and listen, Deb. Keep going.
The farm where I grew up, it was on the opposite mile of my grandparents, but they had already moved into town, into Tripp, which never, as far as I know, according to the census data, never exceeded 1,000 people. So it was really a small town. Right now, it's only like 600 and something. It's a dying rural town. Hopefully, it'll keep going and thrive a little bit longer, but we'll see. My dad was born we always called it the home place. He was born in the home place. He had 3 brothers. There were the 4 boys. And he had a sister, and she died of an appendicitis when she was 2, or supposed appendicitis when she was 2. So it's just my uncles. And they all as well lived within about a 2-3 mile section or area from where I grew up. So we were very close in proximity, but also very close knit. My grandparents lived in Tripp. My mom's parents, unfortunately, my grandmother, she died in a car wreck before I was born, about a year before I was born. My mom was in a coma. Dad was injured. It was tragic. And then my grandfather remarried to a widow, and she had 3 kids of her own, and one of them was my age. So we went to school all the way through. But it was a little bit different relationship with them because it was step family, but still close. So we did a lot more with my dad's parents, probably just because all the relatives were right there. And Sunday mornings, for instance, after church, we would all go over to Grandpa and Grandma's house because it was literally across the street from church. And we would have Sunday dinner there every single Sunday. There were 20 to 30 of us probably every Sunday over at Grandma's house.
Did you as a child realize how much work that was?
No, not at all, because the moms, the aunts, and grandma, they did all the work. They made the food, they'd bring it to grandma's, they'd serve it, they'd do the dishes. Us kids, we played or we walked around the block. We didn't have any recollection of how, or any knowledge of how much that would have been.
I have so much respect for them, so much respect.
Oh, I know. So the farm that I grew up on was, at the time, it was just a small little 2-story house. It had the basement. There was a basement underneath of it, but it was just dirt floors and rock walls. And the main floor of the house had a kitchen and mom and dad's bedroom and a living room and like a front entry porch. If you'll note, I didn't say it had a bathroom because we didn't have an indoor bathroom until I was about 4 or 5 years old. So there was an outhouse on the farm, as well as the chicken coop, a garage, 2 granaries, a great big barn with a hayloft in it, and then a smaller barn. There's a lot of structures on the farm, and they're all still there except the outhouse. That I don't remember when that got taken down, but it's not there anymore. But so I didn't have a bathroom in the house. Growing up, we didn't have a bathtub in the house.
I'm going to just interrupt here real quick. So was there running water, though?
Eventually, mom said that they put that in probably within the first year or so after they moved into the house. But
Okay.
She doesn't remember. I don't know. But there was running water, yes.
My mom always said she had running water in the house when she lived on the farmhouse. But I found out in my later years that it wasn't actually running water. She had a pump at the sink inside the house. And she called that running water.
Yeah, there was a pump just outside the front door. I think that's where they got most of the water for a while. But we took our baths in front of an old oil stove. There were 2 oil stoves in the house, one in the kitchen and one in the living room. And I sent a picture to you of me and my sister sitting in that old metal tub in front of the oil heater. So as I was thinking about even that little tiny piece, we probably took baths once a week on Saturday nights. We were clean for church on Sunday, but we'd have to heat the water somewhere, probably on either the stove or one of those oil stoves, pour it into the tub. I remember closing off the doors because we had to trap the heat in that one room if it was wintertime and try to stay warm. And so we'd just bathe in the living room. And the living room, coincidentally, was also our bedroom because there was no other place. So we slept on a pull-out couch for a very long time until I was about 8 or 9. There was a second story to the house. It had 2 rooms in it, but it was obviously not heated except through some vents that went through the ceiling to the upstairs. It was the only way to get just radiant heat went up there. That was it. We eventually put a furnace in. So once the furnace went in, they cleaned out one of those 2 rooms upstairs and put in a full-size bed and a set of bunk beds. So us girls moved upstairs, and it was the best thing in the world. We had our own space.
One of the things about talking about the heat that I think is so dramatic. So first of all, we're not talking about 1910, Deb. You're young. So we're
Yes, this is the early mid-70s. Yep, not that long ago. I don't know that every farm family was the same. I'm sure they weren't. Some of them probably had furnaces before that. Many of them had bathrooms. That's just how our farmhouse was. And so this is just my experience.
Let me throw something out about that real quick, Debbie. Is I was at my farmhouse, my little farmhouse, this last weekend, and we're working on the kitchen. And we found written in the drawers, one of the drawers, when the kitchen and the bathroom were added to the house was in 1964. They had an outhouse until 1964. And when we talked to the people who lived there, I just now added heat and air conditioning to the house. Like it did not have actual heaters in it. Just now I put an HVAC system in. They had like a little propane heater in the front room. But when I'm at that farmhouse and it's 5 below zero outside, I cannot imagine how cold that must have been. And you lived that.
Yep, I did. And now being an adult, all of my memories feel like good memories. I'm sure they weren't all that wonderful. Cold nights with air leaking through the windows and under the doors. Those houses weren't sealed that well back then.
You were in the 70s now. You're starting to have this house.
Yes.
You have your own bedroom to play Barbies in. I love that you got to have Barbies. I was not allowed Barbies. So I'm a little envious of your Barbies. And so as you're playing Barbies and you're starting to grow up, tell me a little bit more about what's going on in your family that you know now that you didn't know then.
Right. Mom and Dad had rented the farm for a while, and I don't have the dates on how long, and then they eventually purchased it. Dad owned 3/4 sections and then a little bit more land later. Right now, there's a total of 560 acres on the farm.
And the whole section is 640 acres, just so people listening who don't know what a section is.
So Mom and Dad owned 3/4. And Mom and Dad, also, addition to the farmland where they grew oats and field corn, they also had pigs, a feeder pig business, and they also had cattle. But I didn't know at the time. There's just so many memories of being out there with the little baby pigs when they were born. It was just so fun to see the sows with their pigs and the cows with their calves and going out and watching Dad literally pull a calf out of the cow if the cows were struggling. And so those are some really awesome memories that no city kid would know. Not every farm kid would have now anymore. Maybe so, I don't know. But the financial side of things, I was little, obviously didn't know. And back then, parents did not talk to their kids about financial issues in the family at all. You just went through life. You just thought, this is status quo. This is wonderful. Woohoo, I'm growing up. Back in 1970, I've got the article in front of me, 1974, my dad contacted, actually it's probably 73 when this was happening, 72, 73. He got involved with farm, hog, and cattle future trading commodities. And somebody had come to the little small town of Tripp and told them how great it was and how they could make money doing things this way. And so Dad thought he'd get involved with that and started losing and eventually ended up very, very broke. He went to his parents and brothers, called a family meeting at one point, and he told them. They had no idea he had been doing this and no idea how much debt he was in. They had ended up mortgaging the whole farm and was $70,000 to the bank. And he wanted to prevent other farmers from making the same mistake. So he called the national magazine, the Farm Journal, and they interviewed him and put his whole story. He wanted all the dirty laundry aired so that no other farmer would make the same mistake that he made. Not necessarily mistakes, but not do it wrong.
That takes courage. Back to that era, especially in the farm world, you had to be self-sufficient and you had to get it right.
Yes.
And come out and say, I made this major mistake. And I'm running through my mind, $70,000 even now is a huge ton of money.
Yes.
Like your little farmhouse is only worth like $80,000 in today's dollars.
Oh, I know. And
oh my gosh.
Yep. So his parents helped out with some family loans and they were able to dig out of it and pull out of it. But the quote at the end of the article said, and this might make me tear up, I'm not sure. This is a quote from the article, the last sentence. I still have my wife and our 3 little girls love me just as much, whether I'm worth $3 or $300,000. And we didn't know Mom and Dad were struggling. We had no idea because, and the bank, it's not a small town bank. His banker was there. His banker was interviewed at the time for the article. And it was just now in retrospect and knowing that he, like you said, was courageous enough to share the story, go to his family, be honest about it, and survive that. Back in the 70s, in 80s, when interest rates were starting to skyrocket for all kinds of things, I can't imagine all of it. But they didn't let us know. We had no idea that our clothes came from Goodwill or from secondhand stores or from neighbors. But I think everybody did that. You always had your neighbors' kids' clothes. Your things were passed around. Hand-me-downs. Everybody had a hand-me-down.
Deb, it's interesting because in my world, I had that. And my mother, quite a bit older than your parents. My mother would be 97 this year. But she had that mentality of you use what you can get. We thrifted. But because I grew up in a city, in an area where almost everybody had a master's or a PhD or was a military officer, I was so uncomfortable as I got older with the hand-me-downs.
Right.
And as we go through all of these stories, I think that is where like my daughter's generation, the young 20s, are really coming back to that understanding that we have to reuse what we have.
Right. Yep.
I love that.
My dad had an 8th grade education from the country school that he went to. And he also had earned his GED when he was in the Army. He was really proud of that. And my mom went to Tripp Public School and she graduated from there. She was a high school graduate. They married in 1964. I guess I'm backing up here. They married in 64. I was born in 66. And then I had 2 sisters. They were 2 years younger than me, Nancy and then Peggy. And then jumping ahead a little bit in the timeline, when I was 12 and a half, our little brother surprised the whole family. And he came along. And because of Andy, we couldn't survive in that small little tiny farmhouse anymore. So my dad, with his 8th grade education and GED, designed a new house for us. And we built the brand new house literally next door to the old house. So all of a sudden, all 3 of us girls, we had our own bedrooms. We had a new playroom. We had a living room. We had a family room. We had a big kitchen. We had a separate laundry room. It wasn't in the bathroom anymore. It was crazy. It felt like a mansion. It's not, but it felt like one growing up. And that's where my mom still is today. She's still in that same house, which now is over 40 years old. So it's not even that. I was in 8th grade when we moved into the house. I grew up on the same farm my entire life until I went off to college and then married an Air Force guy.
And then your mom still has the farm, right?
Correct. Yes.
So this is one of those things that I don't quite understand. You have a better understanding of this. So your dad had the farm. He managed to keep it. Is it still what did you say, 570 acres?
560 now. It's that piece of land plus some other land that he purchased / inherited from the great uncle. It just kind of passed down through the family. So yes, my dad passed away in 2015. His name was Reno. And some of the land stayed with mom, and then some of it was deeded to us kids. So the 4 of us kids own farmland now. Mom has the other half section. And then when she passes, her will is set up for us to get her farmland too. The goal is to just keep it in the family. My will is written up so that my kids get the farmland one day when I pass. I think that's the coolest part about this. Being an Air Force family, as you well know, we're all over the place. And the farm is the one place my kids consider their stable home place. That was the place we would go to. That's where they want to have Christmas. That's where they want to have Thanksgiving, is back on the farm, because that was such a big piece of their life too. It just encompasses the whole family, the generation to generation. And now my little granddaughter, she was there at Harvest this past year with us. And she loves going to the farm. She can't wait to go to Grammy's farm and go swing on the swings and all the fun stuff that you do on a farm, on our farm.
As I work through repairing what has been, you say that your mom's farmhouse is 40 years old. The house that I'm working on has probably been neglected for about 40 years. As I work through repairing what has been, I will hold in my heart your story of your children and your grandchildren wanting to go out there, because that's what I want for the generations to come. And that's what I hope for the generations to come. So when you think back on, first of all, I know that we're coming to the end and there's never enough time to tell the whole stories and so many stories. Is there any other part of your story that you feel is really important that you want listeners to hear who may not know anything about a farm?
So many things. I think probably the biggest thing is living off the land. We really did live off the land. We had a huge garden and all of us girls had to help with the gardening. One big garden out by the field and then one small garden by the house. And so we grew sweet corn and potatoes and zucchini and peas and lettuce and carrots and beans and all that stuff. And so we'd have fresh produce all through the summer and then can some of it. We butchered our own chickens. If you don't know the gory details of how to butcher your own chicken,
even though I grew up in a city, my dad loved the farm so much and he loved that concept of wanting to be on the farm, and my mom would never go back. Like she did not. But we had chickens for a while. We had horses out in the city. We had these things. So,
oh, right.
Yeah. But butchering chickens, my least favorite thing. My mom hated it too. So we didn't have chickens for very long.
We butcher our own chickens. We had eggs. We would always butcher a pig or a cow and have meat, and then big freezers and everything would be canned. I think the solitude of living on a farm is another piece of it that maybe people don't understand. You're really out there by yourself.
You really are all out there by yourself. You have to be capable to take care of yourself.
Right. And mom and dad, and with the whole farm operation, now that I know a lot more of what that means, and I still don't fully understand it because there's no animals on the farm anymore. It's just cropland now. But what it took to do that just boggles my mind because it's so much work. My brother, Andy, he has taken over the farming of the land, but he's a full-time engineer. So he is hobby farming the land for us, but he loves it. I think if he could make money off of it one day, he would quit engineering and just farm. Like you said, it's in the DNA. That's kind of what he wants to do and loves to do.
When you talk about the engineering part and the farming and the DNA of it, the guy who farms my land, he says that it is much more technology based now than it was when our parents or grandparents were doing it. Can you, for just a minute, that solitude? For me, I want to just share a little bit about the solitude that I experienced. When I go out there, my farm actually has very little cell reception. So if I'm lucky, I can send texts. If I stand in one corner of the room and kind of balance myself, like I can get a cell call. I was out there a few weeks ago completely by myself, which was fine. I had my car. I'm a 30-minute drive from town. It's no big deal. I hadn't realized if something were to happen, no one would know. Like it's just such solitude. I love it. I love to stand outside, and it's hard to describe for somebody who's never heard it, but to listen to the silence.
Yes, yes.
The silence is just encompassing.
Yes, that's what I love about going home. And I will say that it's just slower pace of life, just everything, even the internet. But it's just calming. I can't even explain the calm that I feel when I'm at the farm, regardless of how busy it is and what all is going on. If it's, the rush of harvest or the flood farmed a few years ago. And so we went up and everything that was in the basement of the new house got destroyed. We had to tear out the sheetrock and throw almost everything away. An old antique stereo, just all kinds of stuff. And so it was just really sad and hard work. But even through the hubbub of that, it was still just calming to be up at the farm. And I don't know if it's the open space or my mom lives right on a highway. So it's not like it's quiet. And there's a farm elevator just across the road, like less than a half mile away. So there's always truckers going past and hauling grain. And that's where we haul all of our grain to, same elevator. But it's just riding in the combine. When I was growing up, I used to haul bales, just sitting in the tractor all alone, sometimes with the radio on, but just all alone with my thoughts and just hauling bales in the tractor, just me, myself, and I, or out making sure the pigs had water and feed. I would sing in the hog barn. I had great acoustics, but I would practice my songs. But if we wanted to go somewhere, we had to ride our bikes. Our closest uncle and cousins were a mile and about a quarter away from us, maybe a mile and a third. We would have to ride our bikes there. If we wanted to go to the pool and mom and dad couldn't get us into town because farming was a lot of work, we would bike the 5 miles into town and back home again. Granted, that only happened like once or twice a year because that was just hard work. Our friends were each other. It was the three of us girls. And Andy came along later, but us three girls, it was just us. We would play together. We would go to the fields together. We would play in the culverts. We would go on the elevator. We would go in the barns. We would climb on the corn. Just all of it was us three girls. It was a lot different than the town kids. There was kind of a town kids, farm kids mentality. And it was hard to explain, but the town kids didn't really know what we would go through out on the farm because we couldn't walk to our neighbor's house a block away or 2 blocks away. It was work. It was hard work to get to a friend's house. And so it just didn't happen often. We all went to the same public school back in Trip, and we all had school activities, especially in high school. But in younger years, it was just us. And so we had to find things to keep ourselves busy and play and all of that, which are just so many, many, many more amazing memories.
When I was talking to a gentleman out at the farm, a fabulous human being out there who fills up my propane tank, and they come and they fill up this tank, and I don't know how to do a propane tank. And so he was helping me, we were talking, and he grew up out there and then just stayed. And he's one of the few people I've met who stayed, and he's 50. Oh. And as we talked, he was telling me about that when they hire, they always look for people who grew up on farms because somehow there's this work ethic and this ability to figure things out that farm kids had. And as you were talking and said, your dad had an 8th grade education. My dad only went through 8th grade, and he tried city school for 1/4 of 9th grade and gave it up. Didn't like it. So think of what they did and accomplished with that 8th grade education. It's just amazing to me.
I know, same here. My dad always used to consider himself just a dumb dirt farmer, but it was the farthest thing from the truth. He designed our house. He actually designed his parents' house in town when they moved into town. He designed that house too. He created a model of it. He managed all of the stuff at the farm. But the funniest thing was he wouldn't touch the cars. It's like, I don't know. He wouldn't even change the oil in the cars. He could do anything on the tractors or the combine or the corn picker or the whatever, the windrower. But the cars, nope, he wouldn't touch the cars.
That's amazing to hear that. I think about that now. My dad also could do anything. My dad could fix anything. He didn't much because he was running a business and all of that, but he always had a mechanic. And I know he could because he did it growing up. Deb, as we close out, I would love to just sit for hours and hours and listen to your stories and hear all of them. And I know my listeners are the same way because they're still here listening to you. But as we close up this little bit of time, before we started our recording this morning, you said something to me about that going back and remembering all of this was really important to you, and that you had a desire to give that to your children. Can you tell me a little bit about what you said and how that's impacted you?
Yes, you had mentioned it in one of your podcasts, Jill, about the importance of an oral history or having something to pass down, because I realized that with my dad gone and all of my uncles gone, I don't have a lot of information about those years. I have a few stories in my head, and mom does too, but mom's getting older too. And so those things are just starting to fall. But I want those things to be able to pass along. My dad did some historical and ancestral research and found some really interesting stuff about his great-grandparents. It's fascinating to me. And to be able to hand that down, I think, is just so important. And I want that for my kids and my grandkids, just so that they can see what I lived through. They don't know all my stories yet. I don't think I've shared all my stories with them. And so I want to write it down or do this and have it out there for them. And who knows who else, but just so that they can see and hopefully cherish and find it a really important part of their own history.
Deb, I love that so much. And as we do this Storytellers Porch today, we are on March 3rd of 2022. And no matter when you're listening to this, this is a time where Russia has invaded the Ukraine and a whole world that is changing. Our world is changing. It's always changing. And that's what I believe, like your story of your dad losing almost everything, $70,000 in debt in the 70s, and figuring out a way to come back from that. We have to share our stories for hope. Hope comes from recognizing that I know your great-grandfather did it earlier than my great-grandfather, but they came from another world and started something new. And when we share those stories and hold on to those stories, I believe it gives our younger children hope. And I say children, they're adults, but it gives the younger generations hope that no matter how desperate it looks on the outside, somehow with human fortitude, we come through. Would you add anything to that, Deb?
Funny you would mention the situation with the Ukraine and Russia right now. The reason my great-great-grandparents came over here was for freedom and hope for their family. They were living in Odessa, Russia at the time, now the Ukraine, and they wanted to avoid their military service and wanted to live in a country that was free and hopeful and open rather than one that was built on military might. And I thought how apropos that is now to be able to have such a close relationship in my own family, my own ancestors who left that to come here to start this generation and generational hope and freedom of living someplace like here. And even though it started on a little tiny farm in South Dakota, the hope is still there for our kids and our grandkids too. And you're so right, Jill. That's so important to pass on.
And I know that as you were talking about being self-sufficient with the garden and the animals, I'm watching this very young generation, I think young, my daughter's generation in their early 20s, who are discovering the Victory Garden handbooks. And they're talking about planting gardens this summer so that they can be self-sufficient. And where I live in Colorado Springs, there's a whole thing of city chickens. You can have this many chickens in your community, but you can't have this many. No roosters because they're too noisy. It's so lovely to watch that which I have only been a part of hearing, not a part of living. You have lived it. And to know that it makes a difference. And so, Deb, as you know, the stories that we share here on the porch are personal. Your story was so personal, and your courage and your father's courage to tell these stories make a difference. But the stories are personal with collective impact. And so I'm going to give my collective impact today is just hold on to hope no matter what. Human beings are strong and smart and inventive and innovative and capable. And we will make it through whatever is next in front of us because we have hope and we have community. And the story you shared today, Deb, was so powerful to remind us of that. Deb, thank you for being here on the Storytellers Porch. It's been a delight to have you here.
Thank you, Jill. It was so fun talking with you.
I'm so glad that you're going to take this and keep it going for your own children and grandchildren and their grandchildren. I have written records that my great-grandfather wrote, and it makes such a difference. I only recently found them, and it really helps me to connect to that hope of that generation. Thanks again, Deb. And here at the Storytellers Porch, we believe we are the stories we share. Keep living your story and meet us next time here on the porch. And be sure to bring your favorite drink.
To learn more about this season's storytellers and to catch past episodes of the Storytellers Porch, visit us at thestorytellersporch.com. To make sure you hear every exciting episode with Jill this season, subscribe and follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, and wherever you hear your favorite shows. We'll see you next time here on the porch at the farm, where I'll be drinking iced coffee and occasionally some wild turkey whiskey. What drink will you bring?